this is the news.
This is the news, and you are on Breakthrough. I'm Eugene Perrier.
And I'm Monica Cruz. Thanks again to all of our viewers for joining us for our 4th live stream. It's wild how quickly time flies under lockdown. We're really happy to be here with you again tonight. Yes, sure. Yes, for sure. Kind of bored, but this is the work that's keeping us busy, right? And we're here trying to bring you the most important news and
not trying. We are bringing
you
the most important news.
This is true. We are getting it done. We are getting that done. Eugene, want to tell us what we're going to be talking about on tonight's live stream?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of great things, and just for, to start at the top, I know a lot of you probably saw this. We do have Vijay Prashad, Executive Director of the Tricontinental Institute, coming on a little later in the show, where we talk about all of, well, however you want to term this reopening situation. We talk about that and more with Vijay. We'll also be talking about, the spate of police and vigilante killings we've seen here, some heroic actions by nurses, and some really, quite frankly, just tragic numbers as it concerns hunger here in the United States during the time of COVID-19. So we got a lot of fantastic stuff, as we always do here, Monica. And so before we really get into it, just want to remind people, take a second, take a deep breath, get yourself together, and share this live stream so that way everyone who follows you, your fans, your family can check out this great show. And of course, in case you just missed that last 10 seconds, we're going to have Vijay Prashad coming up a little bit later in the show. But first here, want to start on what is obviously a relatively somber note. Last week, I think Sean Reed's murder by the Indianapolis police really caught the attention of the whole country. Obviously, it was recorded on Facebook Live, including some disgusting comments by the police there. So there's a lot to capture people's attention, and many people have seen that since that time. There has been a lot more happening in Indianapolis. Actually, the same day that Sean Reed was killed, 2 other people were killed. Mikhail Rose, who was murdered by police in what they claim was a criminal action, and Ashlyn Lisby, who was struck by a police cruiser. She was pregnant at the time and lost her child. So very tragic all around on that one day, and that's led to some serious dissatisfaction in Indianapolis. So we want to go to our first clip here, a little something that gives some context on what's happening out there and what's been happening in the streets.
There were hundreds of protesters with signs, wearing masks, and having megaphones, trying to make their voices heard loud and clear. And they say their main goal is to ensure justice is served and their voices are heard in the case of Sean Reed. Now, it started as a peaceful protest around noon, with many people chanting and praying, but traffic was blocked by protesters and officers with IMPD during this time. As that protest began to wrap up around 1 o'clock, it got a little rowdy as some lined the streets in front of police yelling, "Black Lives Matter." Then that protest moved to Monument Circle before coming back to block Washington and Delaware streets at the City County building, where people were standing on top of cars, blocking traffic and outnumbering police.
I really don't have no words. My son, I love him to death. I just don't like the police violence that we have here. It's always been going on. They've been doing it for years. Now it's just ridiculous. I just don't, I don't understand how the police do their job.
Yeah, Sean Reed's father there. We want to go to another clip here, but quickly before we go to that, just to explain it to you, that clip that you just saw, there's been a number of protests in Indianapolis over the past few days. On Saturday, there was another protest, not downtown like this last one, I believe closer to where the incident took place. And just to explain what you're going to see here, there's a little bit of an altercation, it looks like, between the police and the protesters. It seems from my eye at least that it is initiated by the police, but you'll see the video yourself here. While the police attempt to make an arrest, there is, consternation at that amongst those who are in the protest, and the police start firing pepper balls into the crowd. So basically like a pepper spray, but in like a paintball gun. So just to quickly explain, because it's sort of it's hard to tell 100% what's going on, but let's go to this clip here of the protest on Saturday in Indianapolis. Again, you heard heard those final, screams from people. Anyone who's ever been hit by a paintball knows it's extremely painful. So, I mean, you just imagine adding pepper spray to that, Monica. I mean, there's so many things that could be said here. I understand the outrage in Indianapolis, even though I don't live in Indianapolis, because this is too par for the course for Black America. I mean, and in the context of this all, I mean, obviously we're going to talk about Ahmaud Arbery later in the show. We've had the situation in Louisville, the situation in North Carolina with racist mobs, all this happening in like the past 5-6 days, or at least, if not happening, us learning about it in the past 5 or 6 days. I mean, it's hard to even keep track of what racist incidents we're even talking about. I was talking to someone before we were doing the show, and I was getting confused myself about what we were talking about. And just, before I get too off track, I just wanted to note here that I really feel the pain of the Reed family and of all these families, because immediately the issue becomes, what did the victim do? Well, allegedly, Reed and Rose exchanged fire with the police, so it must be justified. That's what the narrative becomes, even though, just like we always see consistently in these cases, the police say the same thing, that I was scared, they had a gun. That's designed to fit a legal pattern to get them off every single time. But the narrative never becomes, why is this troubling pattern in police murders happening? It's always, well, what did the person do to deserve it? And it just, I feel the people in Indianapolis, and I can see why, even in this tough time, they felt like they needed to come out multiple times and make their voices heard and make their presence shown.
For sure. I mean, where there's oppression, there is always resistance. And 3 people killed by Indianapolis police in 24 hours. Absolutely disgusting, but not shocking at all. You even see this in how Reed's father is discussing his death. He's dry-eyed, he's like kind of shrugging his shoulders, he's clearly devastated, but the matter-of-fact way that he discusses it, he says, this is the usual, this disgusting violence that we see in our communities, this unbridled brutality against Black communities that, just as you said, Eugene, we're seeing all across the country. We know that this is the reality for millions of Black Americans, especially in the poorest and most oppressed communities, right? And I'd like to pull up this graph from the Washington Post database on police killings. And we'll see here that while we've seen the number of the rates of crimes, the rates of incarcerations, the rates of arrest obviously drastically dip in this time of the pandemic, we've seen the rate of police killings on a daily average stay the same. You see the dotted line here, 2015 to 2019 is the average daily rate of police murders between those 4 years. And the blue line represents 2020, and we're about at a 2.8 killings a day average. So even with, again, crime, arrest, all of these things going down in the time of this lockdown, we are still seeing that the police are killing Black folks at these just absolutely detestable numbers. This is a crisis. This is an epidemic that happened before the pandemic. And I mean, we see how coronavirus is specifically killing Black Americans at such an accelerated rate because of a lot of the issues that we've discussed on previous shows, this systemic poverty and injustice and violence on so many levels. So we can't even get a break, right? In the middle of a pandemic that's already killing our people in unprecedented numbers. We still have these cops in our communities finding any excuse, any reason at all, does not matter what it is. It is a crime to be Black in a white supremacist country like the United States. And that's just what it is. And it's really just disgusting to see that it's just completely unrelentless, even in a time of such incredible crisis and such incredible need in the poorest communities, in our Black communities. This is what we're still, the boot that we're still living under, right? So
yeah, I mean, it really is. It really is unbelievable. I might be misremembering this, but I think you showed me a statistic yesterday that, like, is it like the 6th or the 7th or I don't know, 8th, some top 10, six highest cause of death for young Black males in America, which is just stunning. And it's so, I mean, it's obvious too. I mean, I went and I looked quickly at before you move on to the Ahmaud Arbery thing here, I looked at the Pew Charitable Trust, Pew Charitable Trust. They got a lot of these rich people, all these foundations, they do a lot of things. Nevertheless, their 2019 study on race, and what it noted was that 63% of white people think that black people are treated less fairly than white people by the police, and that 61% thought the same thing about the criminal justice system. So 63, 61, 60-ish odd percent of white people are very clear that the system is racist towards black people. So there really is no controversy per se, but it's an agreed upon fiction. I think a lot like money in politics. We all know money controls politicians, but politicians say, well, the donations don't determine my votes, and that's allowed to slide. But we could go on and on about that. I want to move here to the Ahmaud Arbery case, which we talked about as well last week. And of course, when you go on all of our Facebook, YouTube, all of our social media, you can find our previous live streams. You want to go check it out. Definitely subscribe, definitely follow, definitely like. But the Ahmaud Arbery situation has taken a bit of well, it hasn't taken a turn at all, but it has created more controversy. There's an appearance to make it look like it took a turn. Some new videos emerged over the weekend that provide a little bit more context, I guess you could say, as to what happened with Ahmaud Arbery in the moments leading up to his murder, essentially. So there's actually two videos that come out. So just to explain what we're going to do real quick for our viewers, we're going to show the first video, which explains some context, and then we are going to show a second video, but because there's a little bit to it, we'll explain what's going on in that video as you see it. So we're going to show two videos here regarding Ahmaud Arbery. So let's go to that first one if we could here.
New video appears to be what a former prosecutor in the case referred to in an email sent after his recusal. On April 7th, Ware County DA George Barnhill wrote there was, quote, video of Arbery burglarizing a home immediately preceding the chase and confrontation. At 2:08 in the video, you see a man in a white shirt and shorts walk into a home under construction on Satilla Drive. Moments later, a person can be seen in the top left frame observing what's going on. A 911 call from that day has audio of a man saying there's someone in a house that's under construction. At 2:13, the first man appears to run out the front door and down the street. 6 minutes later, a police car drives down the road. Multiple first responders arrive minutes later. Investigators have not said there is any evidence Arbery burglarized the home.
And so that was the first clip there. And the last little bit, I think, is absolutely key. No evidence of any sort of crime. So this next clip here, which emerged from the inside of that home, you see it here. The owner here, Arbery, this is allegedly at least what he's doing. I just want to confirm here. His family and lawyer are not even conceding this is him, but it potentially could be. Just looking around an empty construction site, as many people do. So this is essentially what came out. There's some other elements of the video that appear to show a similar individual at some previous time looking around a construction site. And yeah, you know, well, you can see it here. He's not committing any sort of crime whatsoever. He's looking around an empty construction site. And that's the thing that I think is so key here, Monica, is as much just sort of, you know, whatever that people are trying to put about around these videos, that it doesn't really change the story at all, that two people with no justification for no reason assassinated him.
Right. I mean, on paper, the days of Jim Crow are over, but we see time and time again in situations of this racist white vigilante violence that these white folks feel so empowered, so emboldened, understanding that they are very, very likely to not face any sort of recourse or consequences for determining themselves to be the juror and the judge and the executioner in a case like this with Arbery, right? And it's really interesting to me that this murder actually happened just a couple of days before the anniversary of Trayvon Martin's killing, and just the similarities between these stories and so many others. And it just goes to show, and we're talking about, yeah, it's a little, the era of lynchings is over, but this is what we would call a modern day lynching. And this is what we see time and time again, literally two white guys in a pickup truck, like chasing down someone going for a jog. Again, it is a crime to even be alive and be black in this country. And so this is something that so many people would do. That was his neighborhood. He would go jogs on a daily basis. It's what his family and his friends were commentating on. I mean, it's completely normal and understandable that someone would want to check out a house being built in their own neighborhood. It's just really disturbing, but not shocking at all. And we see time and time again how these vigilantes know that the law is on their side, that the system is on their side simply because they are white, and we live in a system where black people are, it is a crime to be black, and it's just really, again, when we think about the impact that the pandemic is having on black communities, and the fact that we don't get a single break, there is no pause in this violence from the state or from white racists who are emboldened by this white supremacist state that upholds their interests overall and gives them a license to kill.
And realistically, like, I don't even care if the video showed him stripping the house of all the lead pipes and brass or whatever to sell it and make money, you know, in some felony. The penalty for that is not death. It's certainly not being randomly executed on the street by two just complete randoms. I mean, you made the point earlier just so well. I mean, the fact that we have this lived history and existence of vigilante violence against black people that allows any random white person to just, you know, decide that they're going to be deputy dog that day and be judge, jury, and executioner. It does not work like that, my dude. Like, even if you saw him breaking into it and stealing everything out of there, you can't just kill someone. And the idea that this would even be shaded as some sort of justification. And I've seen some of these people online saying, well, what was he even doing there? What if he was kept? Again, none of that justifies it in any way, shape, or form. And it just is wild that this is even put in the, like, what is like the GBI is investigating the video. That's the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. What are they investigating? Like, these guys just randomly killed him. But I you know, it's just real quick, one historical note too about the lynching piece. Sorry, just get this in because I don't want to forget this. Glenn County in Georgia, where this happened during the sort of heyday of lynching between the Civil War and 1950, saw 3 lynchings, and those individuals also pumped full of bullets, you know, brutally mutilated in other ways, but also pumped full of bullets. So just an eerie echo of history coming with this Ahmaud Arbery. So we'll keep covering this, and we'll keep looking at this as it continues to grow, because obviously all of these issues are huge, but the attempt to distort the story is a major issue. So we will be here on the case, but a lot of other things to get to, and we always have a lot of great things here for you. But I think before we get to any of that, Monica, a little bit about how people can support and follow us and stay on with us.
That's right, Eugene. Sorry, there's a little bit a lag in the audio on my end, but just as I heard you last say, we're gonna move right on. I want to give another quick reminder to please share this live stream if you haven't already. Tell your friends and family about the important work that we're doing here at Breakthrough News. We are tasked with really breaking through the corporate media that controls 90% of what we consume here in the US. It's 5 corporations dominating the perspectives, the stories, the political orientation that millions of Americans are getting every single day, and especially in a time of such unprecedented crises like now, it is so critical that a platform like Breakthrough is able to continue to deliver the content that we're getting to you every single day, and also really expand the work that we're doing, and also understanding we are now working remotely out of our own homes, making sure that we have the equipment and the tech that we need to keep delivering the news to you, keep delivering these stories of working and oppressed peoples here and around the world, because you're not going to get that anywhere else. And we really appreciate y'all joining us and supporting us. And one incredibly important way that you can support us is by becoming a patron. Check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Breakthrough News. You can see here there's different tiers, levels of giving, and all of these different options give you access to exclusive content like our podcast, like our weekly newsletter, like things like the full interview with Vijay Prashad, bits of that will be airing pretty soon right here. So all of this dope exclusive content is getting right to you if you become a patron. And you know, we really understand as Breakthrough, we're out here, the media arm of the movement, giving you stories from the streets, the perspectives of working people, the people who keep society running, the people whose voices at the end of the day matter the most. And again, you're not going to hear that when you're tuning into CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. You're going to hear that here on Breakthrough. So definitely please check out our Patreon. And we really appreciate y'all's support. And we'll move right on to our next story, something we're hearing a lot about in the press, this issue of food insecurity and hunger. And we already know 44 million Americans suffer from hunger every single year. And we're seeing the rates of food insecurity just starting to very quickly skyrocket in the midst of this pandemic. We're seeing food banks across the country. I mean, miles and miles of cars, families waiting for food. We were talking about this a couple weeks ago on this show, and we'll get right into it with these clips talking about the latest updates on hunger in America.
Every day we see those lines for free feedings and giveaways getting longer and longer.
And now local food banks are sounding the alarm as even they are starting to run out of supplies.
So we would do 40 to 60 families, but now we're doing like 100 plus families.
Bianca Baptiste is a member of Good News Community Church, whose food pantry keeps filling boxes and the need. While dozens have closed, Bianca's food pantry is still operating these days, among the more than 200 that depend on Feeding South Florida to provide all those much-needed meals.
The reality is this is a global pandemic. We're looking anywhere and everywhere, as are grocery stores, as are 200 of food banks across the Feeding America network. So we're all competing for the same product.
And let's face it, the lines from Hialeah to Sunrise and points in between are only getting longer.
Now, according to a new study, nearly 1 in every 5 children is now being left hungry in the United States amid the coronavirus pandemic. This shocking report highlights the vast health crisis that faces us. The Brookings Institution report found that 17.4% of mothers and children aged 12 years or under reported that they were not eating enough due to lack of money.
Wow, I mean, just really jaw-dropping numbers. I would like to pull up this graph of the Brookings Institute study that was just mentioned in that last clip. We have 2 in 5 households with children 12 and under food insecure. We're looking at the right side of this graph, those purple bar lines right there, and you see that little black line that goes through all of those bars is the numbers that were in 2018. So you just see these numbers doubling over the past 2 years, and obviously in the time of this pandemic, I mean, this crisis continuing to be exacerbated. We're talking about over 100 million people at risk of facing hunger in the time of this crisis, right? And I mean, we're in the richest country in the world. And when we think, I feel like when we hear about hunger in a lot of mainstream discourse, how we're kind of taught to think about this issue, I feel like it conjures up images of, you know, some starving child in a third world country, hundreds of thousands of miles away. It feels so disconnected to the reality of millions of Americans. But when we're looking at the number, clearly this is a very real problem, a very real crisis here. And the fact that this is now just being talked about as a very real problem is pretty disturbing in itself, because this has already been impacting so many people, and we're going to continue to see this crisis get worse. Yet here in America, we waste 40% of the food that we produce. 40% of the food that is produced every single year on average is thrown in the trash in this country. So that just goes to show the blaring contradictions and failings of this for-profit system. I'll let you get in here, Eugene.
Yeah, you know, a couple things. I mean, I think first and foremost, we have to recognize while this is that the main reason this is happening, and this is the bottom line of the Brookings Institution study, is that people don't have enough money for food. The second thing we have to recognize is that the stock market is, you know, in some ways, I don't even want to say the stock market. Some companies on the stock market are definitely surging because they can do business right now. So like Jeff Bezos, I don't have the number off the top of my head, has made billions of more dollars, money that he won't even think about or care about. I can't make the direct comparison, but that almost certainly could have a huge impact on the issue of hunger here in America, where even pre-COVID, 44 million people experiencing food insecurity at any given time over the course of a year. 44 million people experiencing hunger at any given time over the course of the year, pre-COVID. Just think about that. And so third, tie those two things together. That's the really reality we're in, where there's skyrocketing hunger because people don't have money, where their money exists, but it's only in a handful of people's pockets or bank accounts or wherever the hell they hold it. It really is an unbelievable state of affairs. And just to cap it all off, let's remember, we've got a strategic petroleum reserve. So if there's too much oil, we got oil refiners covered. We don't have a strategic milk reserve. So when there are big problems with dairy having to be dumped because of challenges with COVID-19, there's nothing we can do for the small farmers, and there's nothing we can do from the hungry people and the hungry children who I'm sure could use milk. I mean, it's a disgusting situation, and it points yet and again to the status quo is not enough. We can't go back to normal. From my point of view, it seems totally unsustainable. There has to be more of a conversation about transformation into something new that can address these glaring inequalities.
That's exactly right. As we've said time and time again in these past few live streams talking about this pandemic, I mean, it's just really bringing out so much of the rot of this system. And I think it's teaching a lot of Americans very quickly that we can't go back to normal, because the status quo was already a living hell for millions of Americans struggling with poverty, struggling with homelessness and hunger. And that just goes to show how this hunger crisis is inherently connected to things like a livable wage, the cost of housing and education, all these basic things, the cost of healthcare. As you mentioned, Eugene, this is what this study is showing. It's that people just literally do not have enough money. And it's not an issue of supply. And that's the thing that bothers me. I'll say really quickly about a lot of these major food supply industry corporations talking so much about, well, we need to get people back to work. We need to be getting food out there with these meat processing plants. We need to get this meat out there for people so people don't go hungry. But it's like, actually, that's a complete lie, because that food is there. There's actually tons of frozen meat stored, in these storage facilities by a lot of these corporations. Why can't that food get to the food banks that are in need? So many things. So it's just very clear that it's this system itself that's the problem. It is not anything that we as individuals do. And I really wanted to pull up a screenshot of this article by a food bank director.
This is interesting.
Yes, a really awesome quote. It was a food bank director in Hartford, Connecticut, and he says this. Talking in a newspaper article in 2007, actually. During my tenure in Hartford, I often wondered what would happen if the collective energy that went into soliciting and distributing food were put into ending hunger and poverty instead. Surely it would have a sizable impact if 3,000 Hartford area volunteers, led by some of Connecticut's most privileged and respected citizens, showed up one day at the state legislature demanding enough resources to end hunger and poverty. Multiply those volunteers by 3 or 4, the number of volunteers in the other states' food banks and hundreds of emergency food sites, and you would have enough people to dismantle the Connecticut state capitol brick by brick. Put all the emergency food volunteers and staff and board members from across the country on buses to Washington, and tell Congress to mandate a living wage, health care for all, and adequate employment and child care programs, and you would have a convoy that might stretch from New York City to our nation's capital. I mean, what more can we say? Again, it is clearly a systemic issue. We cannot separate the issue of hunger from all of these other issues that were mentioned, right? And we need a fighting movement, right? We need to be marching to the Capitol, as this writer so eloquently says. So now we'll bring it up to another, inherently connected to what we were just talking about, the issue of the economy. And this is all we're hearing about, just the inevitable tanking of the economy. These are really scary projections that are coming out from economists projecting that this is going to be a crisis worse than that of the Great Depression, and it's really hard to fathom that. So we'll get right into some of these clips talking about what's going on and what these numbers are looking like.
Great governor.
Wednesday, Iowa Republican Governor Kim Reynolds met President Trump at the White House. Reynolds says ramped up testing and sophisticated contact tracing gives her the confidence to begin phase 2 of reopening the state's economy. Reynolds also praised the president's recent executive order, forcing meat processing plants, many hotspots for the virus, to remain open, and adds they should return to full capacity by next week.
As America reopens, an undeniable reminder of the stakes. So many bodies in Brooklyn, they're being stored in a string of refrigerated trucks, waiting for places to deliver the dead. This with the latest predictions that the number of COVID deaths in America will be double previous projections, 135,000 by August. One reason, those businesses now reopen. That's a response to the spiraling U.S. economy, but with COVID still spreading, the reopen puts countless at potential further risk.
But we'll be adding some people to the task force, and there'll be more in the neighborhood probably of opening our country up, because our country has to get open again, and the people want it to be open.
Wow, I mean,
The
there's a lot
wanted
to be
reopen
said
at the
there.
cost of their lives. Yeah.
A lot to be said there, but we were able to talk to Vijay Prashad about some of these issues. He's the executive director of the Tri-Continental Institute. So we want to go to some of that interview, and then Monica and I will be back. So let's go to Vijay. And we are thrilled here at Breakthrough News to be joined by Vijay Prashad, who's the executive director at the Tri-Continental Institute for Social Research. Vijay, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Well, I first just wanted to get your take on this reopening phenomenon in America. Obviously, many different states, many different cities opening up all around the country, despite what still appears to be serious health risks. I mean, I think a lot of people are looking at this like, what is going on? Maybe just without editorializing too much, your take on this push to reopen the U.S. economy that's happening right now.
See, firstly, I think this is a very complicated situation. You know, in different countries, I think the calculations are quite different. In parts of the Congo, because of the lockdown, children are not being immunized. And, you know, you're going to see outbreaks of measles, which will kill these children. So, you know, let's understand that the lockdown is, of course, an important thing. It's a crucial thing for people to protect themselves from COVID-19. But we shouldn't blind ourselves to the reality that given the kind of system capitalism is, if you're not earning money, you're going to starve. And, you know, before the pandemic, about 11% of US citizens or people who lived in the United States, 11% of people used food banks. And through the first several weeks of the pandemic, it looks like 41% of people who live in the United States are using food banks or some sort of food supplemental assistance. I think this is a very dangerous situation, difficult situation. There's no question that under the conditions of capitalism, the imperative to open is going to be very strong against, you know, these other concerns, the health concerns.
You know, it seems to me, and I really appreciate that point. I mean, and even just reinforcing that prior to COVID-19, somewhere around 44 million Americans, you know, experiencing hunger each year. So, I mean, we're talking about huge numbers with these increases. You're talking maybe even 9 figures. And, you know, taking it as you laid it out there with the realities of the capitalist system, so much of that being laid bare. I mean, it seems that as abstract as some of these questions have seemed historically, or at least how it's presented in the United States, at least around like questioning capitalism, that if we're seriously talking about moving forward, even just beyond the issue of reopening, I think we have to just recognize, just moving forward, the conversation has to center, it seems to me at least, and I'm curious your thoughts about this, on, you know, whether we're just going to keep going with the status quo and this reopening and whatever happens, or whether we're going to seriously consider, given all these contradictions and problems, whether or not this is maybe a time or a platform for greater transformation.
You see, before COVID-19 in Chile, the slogan was, we don't want to go back to normal because normal was the problem. And I think in this particular pandemic situation and seeing how broken so many of these societies are, I think a call to return to normal is totally misplaced. You know, what does this mean to go back to normal? You have governments, elected democratic governments who've spent their time in office hollowing out the social side of the state. You know, a state has institutions that are meant to, at least in a democratic state, operate on behalf of the people. But institutions that are supposed to struggle against illiteracy, educational institutions that are supposed to struggle against hunger, you know, where you create an ability for people to get access to food, institutions that are supposed to help you remain healthy, public health institutions. All of these have been gutted, I mean, destroyed really, in the course of the past several decades. These are democratic governments with a mandate from the people who have basically destroyed institutions that are meant to allow people to live in a civilized way. So to return to that strikes me as utterly misplaced. We have to have a challenge and say, no, we don't want to return to governments with a democratic mandate that work against the people. We need to have a very different normal. We need to make a normal where governments are using taxed income, tax the rich effectively, use that money to produce institutions that produce literacy, that produce health, and that produce a population that's not hungry. I mean, it's a scandal. It's a shame that in these very rich societies, millions of people in normal circumstances are not able to eat. That's a shame. And, I just want to say something, Eugene, that often we talk in bloodless language, when we think about these things. We try to say, well, these are the numbers. I'm not concerned about the numbers. I think the population of the advanced industrial countries with democratic governments elected in their name should feel shame at the way these governments have not been able to handle the pandemic, and they should feel shame in the way that the populations have been thrown under the bus. No wonder people are saying end the lockdown. They're starving. They have a hard time making a living. They're maxing out their credit cards. It's an indictment of the system.
Once again, big thanks to Vijay Prashad from the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. I really hope people check out all the work they're doing. They've got a great newsletter, by the way, that you can sign up for in the Corona shock, as we talked about there. So again, thank you, Vijay. So much there. Vijay's always great. We actually were able to ask him another 2 questions that are available only to our patrons. So become a patron of Breakthrough News. Thank you very much. But I mean, I'm just curious some of your thoughts here, Monica, coming out of this, coming out of the clips we showed before, in this situation we find ourselves in, where 20% increase in deaths could happen from some of these states that reopen, and it just seems like on both sides, because people are hurting economically, that on all sides of this thing, it's a tough road to hoe for working people.
Yes, I mean, huge thanks to Vijay for joining us and really speaking so much truth to power. And I really loved how he kept emphasizing what a scandal, what a shame it is for a country, really one of the richest countries in the history of recorded human history, right? It is absolutely just mind-boggling how we cannot provide some of the most basic necessities to people. And I also loved how, he spoke about people living in a civil way, right? That is really so pertinent, I think, to understanding the struggles of poverty and homelessness and hunger, because just the absolute lack of dignity, lack of humanity that millions of Americans are being forced to live in, because it is a complete inhumanity, it is a complete injustice, it is completely degrading to any individual to have to experience this kind of need. And in a country where we see billions of dollars being made by these big corporations and big banks, as you spoke about Jeff Bezos making billions off of this crisis in the past few weeks, to see this level of desperation and need, and to see how much worse it's going to get, and not even talking about, we're not even hearing about the scope of the problem, prior to this pandemic, none of this is new. So I just want to throw some numbers out there, because it is really staggering. And as Vijay said so well, just understanding the blood behind these numbers, the blood behind these facts, around 140,000 people are estimated to die. This is the Trump administration's own estimates by June. With the reopening of the economy, that's about 3,000 deaths per day. I mean, how are our elected officials and corporate media talking heads able to talk about this so cavalierly and not with any hint of indignation or anger at the reality that so many Americans, again, have already been living in, but now millions more are at risk of living in. And I mean, let's just talk about all of Trump saying we're just going to do it safely, we're going to reopen the economy safely. I mean, what is really safely if there is no contact tracing? What is really safely if there is no widely available tests for all? What is there? How can we do this safely when, to start, we have millions of Americans Americans who don't even have health insurance. So, you know, we really need to talk about all of this, and every step of the way from every level of government from day one of this pandemic really starting to rear its ugly head in the United States. We have seen complete dysfunction, complete confusion, just the opposite of what should be a measured, thought out, comprehensive response to a pandemic. It has been the opposite that we've gotten from our public officials. So is this really who we should be trusting? The Trump administration, all of these state and local governments, should we really be trusting them to handle reopening the economy and keeping workers safe and the most vulnerable people safe during this time? I think that's a no.
I'm just metaphorically dropping the mic. I'm gonna leave it there because you did it. I agree with you 100% on all of that. You know, moving forward here, and in the same spirit, I think, of what you were just saying, Monica, regarding, you know, what needs to happen. One of the things that we also saw and that we've seen over the past few days, this particular clip is from last week, but there's sort of a range of actions we've seen and we will be seeing from National Nurses United. That's the largest union of nurses here in the United States. And last week they did an action in front of the White House, and it's honoring nurses who died because of the lack of the PPE while they were on the front line. So it's both honoring those nurses and a part of their broader campaign to demand real protection for nurses and other frontline workers. So we're going to go to this clip from in front of the White House last week.
We are here today to say that nurses are not being valued the way we should be by our employers and our government, who are failing to provide us safe workplaces and optimal protection as we care for patients during the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead, we are dying. Today, we will read the names of the 88 nurses who have died from COVID since this pandemic hit. Just to give you perspective, when we were here last, we were protesting in front of the White House just 2 weeks ago. We read the names of 46 nurses. We have placed a pair of shoes for each nurse we have lost. We ask you to imagine the nurse who would have walked in these shoes. Imagine this nurse working hard to realize their dream of becoming a nurse, applying for school, pulling all-nighters, studying for a chemistry or anatomy and physiology exam. Imagine the nurse's hands as they prepare to draw blood or assist in a life-saving surgery or the birth of a child. Imagine this nurse filled with love and compassion for their patient and celebrating when that patient returns to health into the arms of their loved ones.
And again, those were nurses from National Nurses United, the nation's largest nursing union. That's Lafayette Park there in Washington, D.C., just north of Pennsylvania, just north of the White House there. And again, honoring fallen nurses and demanding more protections. You can go to for those who want more information, they can go to honorfallennurses.org. That's honoredfallennurses.org for anyone who may be interested in that. But there's a broader campaign that NNU is engaging in to push for more coordinated and better production of PPE, more medical staffing, better medical facilities, more communication and education coming from the authorities. It's really a comprehensive campaign. And I just, tip my hat to these nurses who obviously I think so heroically are on the front lines, as we know, but to step out here also heroically and be on the front lines of the struggle, demanding that we increase the resilience and protection and public health capacity of the whole country for all people. I mean, obviously it's maybe the nurse's ethic in many ways of caring for us all, but I have to say, fantastic to have seen this. I'm sorry it had to happen, but I'm glad that it did happen in these circumstances and that people aren't staying quiet and are continuing to act and to do things as well.
For sure. And yeah, so much solidarity with these nurses. And I think what really bothers me, I'm never going to get over, these, what do they call it? The flying jets, the Blue Thunderbirds that were flown over New York City a couple weeks ago to commemorate healthcare workers and frontline workers generally, for their sacrifice and their work during this pandemic. you know, I looked that up because I was just so bothered by it. I was like, how is this the way that we're honoring our frontline workers when from the start we can't even get them PPE? And it costs about $60,000 to $80,000 an hour to fly these Thunderbirds. So just thinking all of those tens of thousands of dollars spent to fly these things around for an hour, you know, as some just really corny and like militaristic, like, you know, show of solidarity. Meanwhile, all of those tens of thousands of dollars could be used to buying masks and gloves and ventilators, more hospital beds, the things that our healthcare workers actually need most, and the thing that all Americans need most in a time of a pandemic. It's really so pathetic, and it just goes to show, once again, what our government's priorities are. It's not the health of our workers. It is not the health of anyone, actually. And that's just what this really goes to show. And I think what we really need is real material wins for our healthcare workers and our frontline workers overall. And with that comes, you know, a struggle, a fight for, you know, these nurses unions and other workers organizing on their jobs and demanding more from management, demanding more from their bosses, and really forcing their bosses and forcing this government overall to make these concessions and to give these basic things that so many people need right now, and it's just resulting in so many unnecessary deaths.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And again, let's also talk about how the nurses were the canary in the coal mine here, because it was nurses unions like NNU, it was long-term healthcare aides unions like SEIU 1199 that for years have been saying we are overworked, we are understaffed, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the training, we don't have the materials, and it was always dismissed as just these greedy workers. They just want more money. These unions trying to control everything and destroy private business in America. And now here we are with this major crisis, and we can see so many of the critiques of our public health system that came from our public healthcare workers, especially our unionized workers. These nightmares are coming true because we chose to listen to the Wall Street bankers and the profit mongers, and not the nurses, the physician's aides, the radiologists, the anesthesiologists, all the people who work in the hospital, the janitors, everybody there who's been trying to point this out for years about how profits have been gutting our hospital system. But, you know, again, honorfallennurses.org for people who want to learn more, honorfallennurses.org, National Nurses United. That is going to do it for us here on the show for this week. 4 weeks long.
4 weeks strong. What is
there
time anymore? But we're still here, and we're still
we're like a training montage in Rocky.
Seriously, that's what it's kind of felt like, getting this all set up together. But you know, we're here and we're doing it, and we're doing it for our viewers. Make sure to share this video, make sure to like and follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube page where you'll get alerts as soon as we're posting new videos and content. We really appreciate your support, and we need it to keep going.
And don't just watch us, join us on Breakthrough.